Partially.
You did the pillowcase method, right?
Yeah, I still have it in the pillowcase. I've just been like squeezing it through the pillowcase. It's been working out well.
Yeah. I made it. It's quite tedious to squeeze it by hand, honestly. But not the end of the world. I actually this morning kind of came up with a little system for doing it because I have, three methods that need to be hand squeezed now. Since I did, 4 methods yesterday, but one of them was the pressure canner. The other 3 all require squeezing. So I came up with 2 strainers. One is smaller than the other. I fill one strainer with the substrate, and then I press with the other strainer, so that I'm basically squeezing it, but with the 2 strainers. I still have to finish it by hand, but it gets out probably about 80% of the moisture, so not too bad. Just an idea for anyone who's interested. So, I don't want to wait too long, so I assume that the others will join us at some point and whatnot. I did want to start as per my email. I wanted to start with doing a little bit of substrate. Here I've got the oven one, the oven method that I did last night. But I have the water bath one ready to go. I did that one this morning. So I'm going to do a little bit of this just for anyone who's watching through a recording later on so that they know about this step. And then, so I'm just going to do a little bit. I just have some small rules here, just a small little demo of that. And then I'm going to continue on with the water bath one that's finished. So just a little FYI. So before I get going with any of this has just been pulled out of the oven. It was in there for about an hour and a half, registered at 95 degrees when I took it out. So it was definitely pasteurized during that time. And I just turned off the oven and let it sit there overnight. The water bath method, I let it sit overnight. Pressure canner sat overnight. So everything's in the bucket method. That's basically my kitchen right now. It's just chaos, but. So I'm going to mask up. I'm going to put on my gloves. I'm going to spray basically everything, and then I'm going to get going with this substrate anyway. Sorry if there's any sort of glare from the sunlight. It just seems to be pouring in this morning. I obviously, in the past, just yesterday, the sun wasn't coming in at this hour because we had a different time zone. So welcome to the new daylight. I guess daylight savings has begun. Ended? I don't know. Not really good daylight savings terminology. So I'm spraying my hands. I'm going to spray the bowl that the substrate is going to be going into. I don't plan on taking anything off of the table if it falls there, so I'm just going to ignore the table for now. So that one's going to be collecting the substrate. So it just got sprayed, and I don't even need to wipe it down. It's got a generous spray to it, and it won't hurt the substrate that goes in there. This is what I don't care about because that's where the excess liquid's going to go. So my hands are sprayed. The bowl is sprayed. I'll grab some substrate here. Just a small amount for demo. So this substrate is actually significantly more dry than the crumbs are coming off. I got a bit of water dripping there. You can see it maybe. Maybe not. Basically, I'll do it again here. This is almost at field capacity just in itself. Just gonna do a quick zoom here. Everyone can see here. So if I'm squeezing, this is all just
This is actually, that's perfect. But you can see there's drips happening there. Probably see it mostly the crumbs, but there's also drips coming out. It's formed. Dump it into the bowl. Those are the top layers of the oven one, so makes sense that it's a little more dry, but I don't even need to do it honestly with the oven one. This seems like it's pretty well hydrated without much excess. So maybe a bad example on that one. I'm probably going to do. So maybe for the future, maybe you want to actually consider having the oven method, simply because this actually came out quite hydrated. I would say it's perfectly hydrated without much excess moisture. Maybe there's going to be some in the corners. The first handful I grabbed had a bit of moisture in it, but overall it seems like it's actually right on. And maybe that's because it kind of continued drying up when I turned off the oven. Secondly, the recipes say pull it out of the oven, but then you're going to be squeezing out the moisture. So in this case, it's pretty good. But I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, so we're going to do it again this time. I want to show you guys. So this just got sprayed. This is my water bowl. I'm going to show you is the bucket method there. You're going to see that as a different substrate as well. Right here. So I'm not sure if you guys can see that inside of there. This is the new substrate. So this is the cocoa coir, vermiculite, and gypsum. I'm just giving it a mix here. So if you remember, that was a big brick of cocoa coir, and now it's basically just straight up, well, cocoa coir sawdust, if you will. So I'm just giving this a mix so that's nicely mixed together. And there's definitely excess water in here. So I'm going to give it a bit of a thorough mix, and then I'm going to start squeezing out some of that water as a demonstration. Okay. Pretty well mixed. One thing that's worth mentioning if you're doing the bucket method, I know most people weren't really around to see the bucket method. Some people have left already. But basically, before I added the boiling water to this, I made sure to take alcohol and spray the insides of the container and give it all a nice wipe down, as well as the lid, because again, you're just adding boiling water to the ingredients and sealing it up. So if there's any contaminants, and there will be, if there's any contaminants sitting on the sides of the bin, then you're going to get some contamination probably. So for that reason, I was sure to spray it down before adding the hot water. So if you look at this, it looks actually like pretty good. It looks like a nice soft soil, but if I squeeze it, I'm actually going to get quite a bit of water out of it. I don't know if that's visible on camera. Can someone confirm if that's visible?
Yep.
Okay, great. So even this, even though it looks like it's well hydrated with no excess, like if I look inside of that bin, there is no excess water. Everything looks fully hydrated and good, but in fact, it does have excess water. So when I squeeze it, it's coming out. It's not too bad, which is great. The recipe I use for the bucket method is quite on point with the amount of water. A little bit comes out, but not too much. So that would basically be how you're going to squeeze out any of it. And it's not rocket science on squeezing out water. Again, if you can come up with a method that works for you, whether that be adding the substrate into a big pot and then putting a smaller pot inside and pushing down on it. You just have to remember that if you're doing anything like that, you're going to need to sterilize it, right? Give it a spray with a 70% alcohol on both the inside of the pot that's holding the substrate and the bottom of the smaller vessel that's going to be pressing against it. There you go. So I'm going to stop there. Just a little FYI on this. If you have a little excess moisture, and even here, I mean, I don't know, again, there's water in there. That's just been 2 handfuls of cocoa coir. So there is sufficient amount of water. I'd say maybe 10% over. So if you imagine that this is 100% hydrated, this is probably the equivalent. What's in the bucket right now that hasn't been squeezed, it's probably like 110%, let's say. So there's a little bit of extra water that needs to get out. What's going to happen if you don't squeeze out that water is that eventually that water will settle. So when you're inside of your bag, what's going to happen is you're going to end up getting a pool of water at the base of your bag. And that's going to be the perfect conditions for mold to grow. So you really don't want that pooling of water, which is why we're trying to get out as much of the water as possible. So the water bath method that everyone used is the most water intensive, right? Because you're literally putting your substrate straight into the water, and now you just have a pool of water that you need to extract from the substrate. Bucket method had a specific amount of water that allowed it to be, hydrated with a little bit of excess. The oven method had excess water, but it looks like it's pretty good to go even without squeezing. And obviously the one that was done in the pressure canner is just ready to go right off the bat because it didn't have any extra water going inside of it. So going forward, you can still always do the water bath method, but it's going to come up with a little bit more tedious work in terms of squeezing out the excess water. So just a little FYI on that. So with that done, I'm going to put this bowl back into my bucket. I'm going to move. Any questions on the squeezing method? I'm going to take that as no. Okay. Okay, I'm going to give my hands a little wash here and clean up this workspace, and then we'll move on to actually filling bags. Okay. Amazing how much mess is made when you're squeezing stuff. It's really everywhere. So I don't recommend that anything that kind of goes off of the table or onto the table while you're doing your squeezing, just leave it. At the end of the day, whether you have a 5-pound bag or a 4.95-pound bag, it's not going to change anything. So if you have a little extra don't be too picky on it. If you know, when I was squeezing the water bath method, there was definitely some extra at the bottom, you know, probably the smaller particles of sawdust. All of that just, you know, got thrown out because I'm not going to be bothering with kind of the dust of the sawdust. So. Okay. So here we go. So we're about to inoculate, right? If you had a flow hood, this would be a great time to turn it on. If you were using the furnace filter and fan, this would be a good time to use it. I'm not using one. I don't expect many of you are. But now's the time that you would turn it on. Gloves on, mask on, hair tied back, fresh clothes, no long sleeves, you know, the usual gist of it. Spray my hands and my forearms here. So it's nothing really special to fill our bags with the substrate material. I'm just gonna fill it, as well as add a tablespoon of the gypsum, right? Then we're going to break up the spawn, and we're going to be adding the spawn into the bag as well. And so I got 3 spawns here. In fact, funny enough, I thought I almost killed these because I grabbed them this morning. Apparently I had a heat mat on. I thought that the heat mat was off. The thermometer inside of the bin was out of it because I didn't think it was on. And so it actually turned on basically full blast and had been going for a few days. So the bottom of these jars are actually quite warm. And I'm hoping that it didn't have too much impact on anything. It was one of those things, you know, smallest little moment of forgetfulness and you can be set back with it. So I kind of wanted to go into, I'm going to do one bag. Again, I have 3 different or 4 different methods that are going on. And there's 4 methods for sealing the bag. So it's the sealing part that is a particular, that's kind of where the trick comes in. So filling a bag is filling a bag. Adding a tablespoon of gypsum is just adding a tablespoon of gypsum. Breaking up the spawn, adding that, okay, fine. All of that is relatively simple to do. But then the key is that you then need to seal the bag in literally the best possible way you can, because it's going to be sitting there for a while. The jar, of course, you had a lid on, it closed, and you had the air holes in there, right? It was easy to seal this. The bag is not so easy to seal. Last week, I put out a video in the virtual classroom that talked about different methods that you could use. Not sure if everyone saw that. We're going to be going through some of them. I'm not going to actually be using all of them. I'm going to show you how it would be done for each one of them. So let me get started here. Again, we're using one of these bags. We're going to be filling it with the substrate materials and with a tablespoon of gypsum, and then we'll go from there. I have a spoon, but I can't find it. It's appeared in me a little while ago. Okay. So now I'm opening this bag, which is basically nicely sealed. As soon as I open it, I'm exposing it to contaminants. So I want to move, and now that that plastic is off there, that's being exposed to contaminants as well. So I want to move relatively quickly, but most importantly, I want to keep as much of a still air as possible around me. Before I shit on the screen, my hands again. Never be too careful. So as mentioned, you're not supposed to touch the inside of these bags if you can help it. I always find it's a little difficult to unpeel them without touching the inside of the bag, but here we are. I just put in a few handfuls first, just kind of get a ground floor of bag. This entire amount of substrate is going to go into that bag. So this is a one bag pot, if you will. You can imagine how if you were doing a lot of bags, that maybe you wouldn't want to be doing the squeeze method for, 6 bags, even 2 bags, probably quite a bit. So there's a nice floor in there. Just nice and straight, all good. Just add the rest of it. This should be about 5 pounds of substrate in here. What I'm going to do is actually keep a tablespoon or probably about a tablespoon worth of this substrate to the side. I'm going to do a little hydration test after the fact, just for curiosity. I'm going to take a little bit to the side here. So this is all substrate that's fallen here, cleaning up on the counter. None of this is going to go into the bag. That's all dirty at this point. Gypsum. Just a nice tablespoon. Technically, you have quite the flexibility in terms of how much gypsum you add. I believe this is about a 2% concoction by adding a tablespoon, and I believe you can go up to something like 12%. But whenever you add nutrients into a substrate, you risk getting some sort of contamination as well from it. One, it's not pasteurized, but 2, contaminants love nutrition as well. So by adding these items, anything that's high in protein and whatnot is likely to be contaminated faster. So okay, so that's in there. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to add my substrate. So as mentioned, the 1 to 5 ratio. So this is 1 pound-ish of substrate, and that's 5 pounds of the new substrate. So what's going to happen here? So we have a full mycelium block, and I want to break it up. If this was grain spawn, you would actually try to break it up into individual grains. That would be basically the most ideal, would be individual grains, but this is not grain spawn, this is sawdust spawn, and so you can't really get it down to an individual grain because it's sawdust. So what we're just going to be doing here is breaking it up with our hands and trying to get the best kind of think rice. You want to get kind of rice-sized pieces of your spawn mixed in there. I'm gonna spray my hands just once more. Now in this case, it's pretty much impossible that I'm going to contaminate the jar. The jar is fully colonized. It's already won the battle, but I'm going to be touching it now and trying to break it up. So it's really important to me that my hands are clean. This is why we use a wide mouth jar, by the way, so we can just knock it out. You can imagine how difficult this would be if it wasn't a wide mouth jar. So basically, I'm just going to take it, if everyone can see. Can you guys see all right what I'm doing here, or should I move the camera forward?
It's fine.
So basically, I'm just going to grab it, and while it's still in there, I'm just going to break it up into chunks and let it fall in there. Again, I'm trying to prevent much movement in the air around. What I'm seeing here, oh, there's a big clump there. I'm going to break that up. It's mostly colonized, but there's definitely some area in there that looks like maybe it wasn't fully colonized, maybe 90%. It's perfectly fine. After all, this is the same sawdust. Well, basically the same substrate as what's in the bag. So either way, it's going to want to eat through it. So one of the good things about grain spawn, if you go with grain spawn, is that it tends to break up pretty easily. So you could actually just shake the jar a bunch and then basically just pour the whole thing into the bag. And in doing that, you're really reducing your chance of contamination because you don't have to actually, spend time breaking it up with your hands. So grain spawn is definitely a worthwhile item, but as mentioned in stage 1, when you're doing spawn creation, it itself is a higher chance of contamination. And when you're inoculating a bag, because we're using the hardwood substrate, hardwood spawn, we can add basically as much substrate as we want. But if you're using grain spawn, you couldn't do that because you could actually over fertilize and kill your mycelium. So that's some dangers with grain spawn. You have to know what you're doing when you're using grain spawn, but it is ideal if you do know what you're doing. So now it's in there. I want to give a quick wipe on the inside of this bag because there's quite a bit of substrate. I'm going to grab my paper towel. I'm going to spray that with alcohol. Lots of alcohol. Give it an inside wipe. Doesn't need to be perfect. With the canner, it had to be perfect because you're trying to get a seal, but you're not going to get a seal on here, and nor are we really trying to. We're just trying to kind of clean up the bag more than anything. Okay. Now it's in there. So now comes the sealing part. So what we want to ensure is that when we close this bag, we actually trap in air. We want air in there. We just don't want to, we don't want to be blowing in air after the fact kind of thing, right? So what we do, okay, well, I guess there's different methods. What we're going to do with today is so there's the elastic method, the iron method, the hair straightener method, and the sealing machine. I would love to know what people are using so that I can start with whatever one. Or what they think they're using. Or if you'd like me to go through it, I can go through it first. I can go through each option if you guys are unsure. So, second. So the elastic band method is obviously pretty easy, right? You saw that with my other grow kit here. Right? So as you can see there, right, basically the bag is just folded. Now, when you're going to be actually folding it, I'm going to move the camera forward here so you guys can see a little better. So when the bag is folded for the elastic, what you want to kind of make sure you do is pinch a little bit at a time and just kind of move it forward, move it forward, move it forward, move it forward. Just kind of tucking the inside into the rest of it. So essentially take it, pinch a little bit in, pinch a little bit in, pinch a little bit in. Just keep pinching it in. By doing that, kind of creating a nice little seal. Just give it a little spin, and then the elastic goes on. What I often do is I'll find kind of, when I put the elastic on, often I'll find a little bit of excess, one part of the elastic that isn't on there. See that it has a little bit of room of flexibility, and grab that and tighten it. Basically, get this as tight as you possibly can get it. So kind of like a balloon. If I poke it, air's coming out as much as I can hear. I can press on it, not going anywhere. That's basically what we're looking to have, right? A nice air pocket, a nice balloon effect in there. So this bag has been sealed, the substrate's in there, the gypsum's in there, the spawn is in there. And with that extra air, now what I can do is give it a shake. This is why it didn't matter too much to clean the inside, right? Because this is what we're doing next. Really, it was for the top here to make sure that that has a nice mix. But here you really are trying to get that mycelium to mix in throughout the entire substrate. So you want to make sure that there's a little bit at the bottom, a little bit in the middle, a little bit at the top, right? Don't worry too much. What I like to do, what I've done with this is that every couple of days, every few days, I go in there and I give it a shake anyway. There's a bunch of substrate up here in the top, so I just want to knock it down. And that's it. So this bag still has an air bubble, right? But otherwise it's been nicely mixed. Give it a bounce like that again, just to make sure that it remains a cohesive block. And I'm not sure if you can see that, but there's different coloration of sawdust in there. So basically the light brown is the one that's been relatively dried and eaten up by the mycelium in there. So there's some light brown, and then there's the dark brown, which is what the substrate got mixed with. So there you go. So that's how we would do this one. So that one's done and it can be stored away. But there's other methods of closing the bag that are a little bit more secure than going with the elastic band method. If you have a zip tie, first off, zip ties are pretty good at that too, because they can seal with a pretty strong seal, right? Just using all of your force to tighten it. But again, if the folding component wasn't done properly, then you're probably going to have some creases in there where air can get out, and you don't want that. So basically, you can press on it and no air is going to be coming out. That's how you know that it's a good seal, right? So of course, that filter needs to remain kind of open. That's going to release your carbon dioxide, allow a little bit of airflow exchange. But overall, that's the process there. So if you were doing it a different way, you have three other options. One is a sealing machine. That is by far your ideal situation, right? If you actually have a sealing machine, then you can just put the plastic in there and close and seal it. But it's not the only option, right? The makeshift home DIY, which works basically just as well. It's just a little more tedious again. By the way, you can buy a sealing machine for, I think, as low as like $50 or $60. So it's not a bad investment at all. These are your two other options. So these operate in much the same way. This is my wife's hair straightener, and this is just your basic iron. So basically what you would do is we're going to be trying to, you're basically melting the plastic, right? If you got a bag here, demonstrate. So two methods. So if you were using a hair straightener, basically you would turn it on really high, use some parchment paper, or not parchment paper, baking paper. Parchment paper. Grab a piece of it. Want to make sure that it fills the entire side of it, right? So basically what's going to happen is you're going to have your full bag, right? And then at the top, you're going to pinch together the sides of it, right? So that it comes back to appearing kind of like this, right? You want to get it as much like this as possible. You really need to have a straight plastic, right? If you're going to be sealing it and melting the plastic together, it needs to actually be aligned. Otherwise, you're going to have a gaping hole over here. Everything's going to be sealed except for over here, and there's going to be a big pocket. And it's not going to work for you, right? Now you're going to have melted plastic and it's going to be fully sealed all here, but not in the corner. So you have to make sure that it's a nice flat. Fold your parchment paper in half. Doesn't need to be this big of a piece of paper, by the way. That's just what I happen to rip off. And place the tip there of the plastic inside of the crease of the parchment paper. Now I know, I feel it. It runs from here all the way down that crease to here. And then basically all you're going to do is, not on this surface, but on a hard surface that won't melt, you're then going, oh wait, this is with the hair straightener, so it doesn't need a hard surface. There, you're going to take your hot iron and you're just going to press it right on there. You're going to hold it for 15 seconds, right? And you turn it around and you do the other side for another 15 seconds, right? And then I've known some hair straighteners that one side, maybe they're just older hair straighteners, but one side is a little cooler than the other. So I actually tend to flip it around and then do it again on both sides. Another thing you can do if you want a double shear is that after you do that original seal, fold it over and then again, put on your plastic wrap and do the whole process again. And that will give you a double seal. Obviously, if there's a little bit of a hole and you do a double seal, then you have a better chance of it not being a hole anymore. So that's great. But you really need to use this paper, right? If you don't use this paper, you're going to melt that plastic right onto here. And, that would be just a waste. So don't recommend that. Now, that's if you're using the hair straightener. If you're using an actual iron, then you actually want to use aluminum foil. So I don't really understand why the difference is between the two. This is what I've learned over the years. But basically the same concept. You're going to grab your aluminum foil, you're going to fold it in half. You're going to put your plastic inside the half, right in the crease there. And you put that down and seal it with the iron, right? Again, same kind of concept, right? You want to iron one side, you're going to hold the iron there for about 10 seconds, 15 seconds to melt it. And then you're going to do it on the other side as well. You're just going to flip over the bag and do it again. Now, it's a lot easier to do this with an empty bag. It's not so easy when your bag has 5 pounds of substrate in it. So just worth mentioning there, because once your bag fills up, you want to be sure that you have a full air pocket in there and your iron in the top, right? So to get a bag, right, you basically need to be sitting in the way that I am, right? So I'm at the table, and you would need to basically have a flatness where your substrate's going to sit, and then your air pocket, and then just flip the side, the very end of it over and do your ironing, right? That way you can keep that air pocket in there, you can keep that substrate in there, and you're not going to be causing too much of a mess. But it is a little tedious, but it's not much more than in a commercial setting where they use the actual plastic sealer. The plastic sealer also is, basically the same concept. What they would do in the commercial setting is basically where my camera is right now, that would actually be the HEPA filter. So I'd be having fresh, clean air blown towards me, and right under the filter would actually be my plastic sealer. And so what happens is that they do all the work, and they put in all the ingredients. They would point the bag into the air to get all that fresh, clean air to ensure that's what's in there. And then they would go down a little bit further into the plastic sealer, and they'd seal it. So that's basically how they would do it. If you don't have the clean air component, then it's not a big deal, as shown here. But obviously it's ideal. So that's basically the mixing and sealing of these bags. Coralie, what's the, oh, Anne, you have a sealing machine, well done. What is a sealing machine? A sealing machine is basically a hair straightener, but large and industrial. So it tends to have, I believe it's like a rubber coating that heats up. So you put your plastic inside of there, and it just seals the plastic, right? It just melts it, it's just at a high temperature. But you usually just, if you think of it like, a component, it just closes down onto it, and then you lift it up. Yeah.
I have a question, Rob. It's
Yeah.
Ann. The kits that I get from JCB Mushrooms or other places, the bags feel like they've been vacuum sealed. But the ones you're doing have air in them, like a fair bit of air. It seemed to me the other kits intentionally had no air. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's funny because most of the kits that you will buy have no air in them. I think that is primarily due to the fact that they're shipping them. And you can't really ship them with a whole bunch of air in there and still have it stay as a solid block. My assumption, because I've seen John do his work before, and he does use the air component. So I believe what he's probably doing is having the air in there, and then when they're fully colonized, he's basically folding it over and sealing it again without the air in there. To help answer your question, because once it's actually going, right, once it's fully colonized, you don't really need any of that, right? Because now you're going to be slicing a hole open, right? So you don't need to care for the carbon dioxide or anything like that. It's going to be released through the hole from fruiting. But when it's actually colonized, and we want it to be completely secure, right? So the only air exchange that's happening is through the filter. But the rest of the air just kind of provides a little leeway, if you will. But mostly it's actually so that we can really mix it. That's kind of the main component there. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
So if there's no other questions on that, I mean, this was a pretty quick session. I could demonstrate one of the sealing components if people are interested. I didn't think I would be able to do a second bag, but since the oven substrate seems to be pretty
pretty okay. Actually, I do have my my canner as well, so I can do another one immediately. Would
I'd
you
like
guys
to see one with the sealer, because
Yeah?
I'll be using a sealer.
Not the sealing machine. I won't be using
Oh.
a sealing machine. I don't have a sealing machine, funny enough. I don't.
You could borrow mine.
I should just buy one. Like I said, it's a good investment. It's $50, but I don't know. I just never got around to buying it. I have basically a full lab for mushroom growing, but don't have some of the most basic, because elastics work, right? So why buy something? Why reinvent the wheel, I guess. But is anyone planning on doing an iron or the hair straightener? I can demonstrate one of those. Yes, Audrey, I know it does make a mess. So anyone, is anyone doing a different method of sealing? Because otherwise I don't really need to demonstrate it, but, or I will, but that's basically, what I'll do is I'll do one more, the canning one. And you guys can ask any questions during that time, but basically I don't have too much more information other than that. Oh, we are using an iron. Okay, thanks, Sylvia. What do we do now with our sealed bags? I use the rubber elastics. Yeah. So this basically requires the same conditions as your spawn, right? You're going to have, it's still in the colonizing period. You just added more for it to colonize. The only caveat here is that you probably don't want to have any light. And the reason being that, in fact, someone, maybe it was you, Audrey, had shown that there may have been some mushrooms starting to grow within the jars, right? So when the mushrooms start kind of feeling like they've eaten their adequate amount and they have some light exposure, they will start pinning, is what we call it. And pinning is basically the beginning of the fruiting. You don't want it to fruit until you've told it to fruit. So because it might start fruiting if only half of it has been colonized, but so if you had a bag and only this half was colonized, you might start getting pins over here, right? But really you want the whole thing to be colonized before you start fruiting it. So what you want to do is, while it's colonizing, to avoid this accidental pinning, you actually want to keep it in the dark. So with the spawn, doesn't really matter. But for these bags, it really does matter. You do not want these to be exposed to light. So put them inside of a box, inside of a container, whatever you need to, inside of a plastic garbage bag if you need to, like a black garbage bag, whatever you need to get it done. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that these bags, as it colonizes, it emits heat. In fact, so much so that in a commercial setting, they would suggest that when you're sitting, and you see this when we go see JCB farm, is that when they're in the fridge, they're not pressed up against each other to maximize space, because this can actually overheat the mycelium and start killing them. So they're always spaced apart so that the heat doesn't affect the individual bags. So that's how much heat, and that's mushroom blocks inside of a walk-in fridge, right? And still they separate the bags because of that heat. So it is worth noting that. I know some people use heat mats and this and that. You probably don't need a heat mat at this point, unless your house is particularly cold and maybe you want to, have a little extra heat. But it will generate its own heat. Probably not right off the bat, because there's a lot more sawdust in there than spawn, but definitely as it's growing. So in the second half, let's say in a week's time or so, that will probably start getting pretty warm on the inside. So we don't want to add any further heat, if you will. So that's basically the only other component when you're storing these bags. So you still want it the same temperature as your spawn, and humidity is fine as well. It's basically trapped inside of there. You can provide it if you have a house that is very low in humidity. It's best to have this in an area where there could be more humidity, simply because over time some of that humidity will escape through the filter, and you don't want your bag to dry out. But you're probably okay regardless. It has a big air pocket in there. The substrate is pretty moist, especially if you did the water, the boiling water method, then you probably have sufficient moisture in there to keep it going for a while. So with that, I'll go on to the next one. Anyone have any questions on storage? Okay. So I'm going to grab my other bag here. Okay. You notice that this one is sealed. There's my solid block. Oh no. Guys, I don't think I'll be able to. I have a malfunction bag. Let's do that. So this happens from time to time. I don't know if you can see that, but there was a split in my bag. I did hear at one point when it was going a bit of a pop, so that was probably it. So unfortunately, as the pressure was going, the side to come out through there. So that's too bad. You know, I'm still going to use this. Actually, I'm just going to transfer it into a different bag because I think that was a minor pop. They'll probably did a pretty good job of pasteurizing. So I'm going to use it anyway. I just need to transfer into a different bag. That's too bad. Because otherwise, this is basically exactly how you'd want it. So there's a nice seal on this bag. It definitely sealed quite well at the top, but unfortunately, you know, I got a little of that pop at the bottom. So, but it happens. Forgot my necessities here. Got my mask, gloves. Okay. Give everything a nice spray. One finger here. That's what we want. Put it right at that hole that's been formed because the rest of it seems pretty well sealed. Doesn't look like too much moisture added in. I was a little concerned that it pops at the bottom. It was steaming for a couple of hours, but maybe that much got in there, but looks okay. right. Too bad. Still pasteurized. It's all good. That was actually an ideal situation for a rip to occur, because sometimes when a rip occurs, what can happen is that the substrate actually just pours out. You know, then you're dealing with a whole bunch of substrate instead of a pressure canner, and that's a mess to clean up and whatnot. So in this case, there was just a slight tear in the hole, but otherwise everything was fine and got, you know, still got sterilized. Basically. So great. Give this a wipe. Okay, so what are we doing today? Are we doing the iron? We'll do the iron. Just plug it in. It's one of my favorite calendars of all time. Was this calendar that I got last year. That's absolutely phenomenal. It's amazing quality, thick paper with nice, you know, botanical drawings of different mushrooms. So very nice little calendar. But the reason why I'm mentioning it is because now the year is over. I might actually cut out those photos and put them up on my wall, but I actually use the back of it as for my ironing board. I have an ironing board, but the thing is about ironing boards is that they tend to have soft basis, and you don't want a soft basis for this. So you basically want something that's going to add, you know, a nice hardness to it without it actually being important to you, right? Because your iron might burn through it. So I did this before with a shirt on a table, and I ended up picking up all the, I don't know what it was, the varnish from the table came up on the other side of the shirt. So definitely make sure that whatever you're working on is not too big of a deal. So give my hands a spray, give a nice little wipe down to the inside of this bag as well. Now, if you're using a actual, you know, sealer of any sort, whether it be an iron, a hair straightener, or a plastic sealer, you really do want to make sure there's no particles in the way. Those will prevent a proper seal. All the natural lines. Second, I need to have something here. A flat surface. 1 second. Little tabletop desk here. Particularly useful for something like this. Now I have a flat surface to work on. All right. So following the natural contours, just going to pinch the sides there, right on the corners that are already there, on both sides. Yeah, so there's already air in there, obviously, unless I pump out the air is in there, right? So now we're in there, I just have to fix this inside there. Go. Perfect. All right, so I got a nice even flat seal there. Add this into my aluminum foil. That air pocket is putting quite a bit of annoyance. Sorry, I was just listening to the iron. I wanted to see if it was hot. 15 seconds.
I'm assuming this is on the hottest setting?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do about 15 seconds on both corners. Ensure a good seal. And then I'm going to flip the bag around. I'm going to do it again on the other side. Keep in mind that the aluminum foil is going to get pretty hot. Things like that, I always forget to kind of mention. I have my chef hands, so I'm used to dealing with the hots, but not everyone is. So the aluminum foil is pretty hot. Be careful. You might want to wait a second to allow it to cool before taking it off. There you have it. So a little closer there. See the nice seal. See, it's like completely melted all over there. In this case, it's like 4 inches, no, 2 inches of solid melted plastic. There's no way that can be opened up. That is a solid seal right there. It has its air. Fantastic. There we go. So that would be a seal with an iron. Yeah, not much different with the hair straightener. Right, with a hair straightener, you would just use the parchment paper instead, and but otherwise it's the same concept. So, any questions on that?
I have a question about, because you did the canner method with that last bag. But when you had it in the canner, you were looking for a seal, but you didn't have air in it. So what do you do there? Like when you get it out of the canner, what happens then?
If it had a seal?
Yeah, like if it had a seal, but it would not have had air in it, right?
Yeah, so realistically, it doesn't really matter. You're looking for the seal just so that, so typically the seal, right? Because understand that most of these practices come from a commercial basis. So if you have 100 bags that just went into a sterilizer and they came out, right? You want them all to be, you know, vacuum sealed if possible, because you might not get to them for hours and hours and hours, right? And it's better to have them, you're going to have to take them all out to put in more ones and have those sterilized for the next 12 hours or so. So meanwhile, all those bags are just going to be sitting to the side on a shelf somewhere, right? So if they're nicely sealed, then you don't really have to worry about them. But if they're all loosey-goosey, then, they're already, have a chance of getting contaminated during that time. Regardless, you're going to need to add your spawn to it. So it will need to be opened up when it's time to add your spawn. The other thing is this is really only for actually for spawn creation, but on a commercial basis, what they'll do is they'll use these bags for spawn. And then 1 5-pound bag of spawn is good for 25 pounds of new fresh substrate, right? So they're going to use one of these bags, just bulk spawn basically, right? So they're going to use these. But what you can do is you can actually buy bags that have a specific patch for inoculation with your needle. So essentially you can keep it as a fully sealed bag when it comes out of the sterilizer. And usually right at the bottom of the bag will be this little injection port, right? It's a little piece of rubber essentially that self-heals over itself. And you basically just put in your needle straight into that injection port and you squeeze in your mycelium. And so you'll never actually have to open up anything again. So, so depending on whether you're doing the spawn bags or just regular grow bags, if it's a grow bag, you're going to have to open it up to add your spawn. But if it's a spawn bag, then you can just inject it directly in there without having to remove that seal that's been made. So, but regardless, even if the seal was made by the sterilizer, it's still going to be sealed with plastic, I guess a bag sealer anyways, just because that seal is not going to hold by itself forever. Chances are as it starts growing and CO2 starts getting emitted and whatnot, it's going to start affecting the bag. So it's going to be sealed regardless. It's just nice to have that extra time, if you will. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thanks.
Perfect. Any other questions? I don't really have much more to do today. So, I have a lot to do today. I just don't have much more to say today. So, if anyone else has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, it's basically the end of it. So, I noticed that no one was following along really when doing this. So I assume everyone is. Oh, you were on. Okay. Fair enough. Sorry. Didn't mean to offend.
Sue has a question.
Yeah, Sue.
Yeah, I don't know, silly question. We have 3 jars of spawn. Do we put them all in the one bag or just the one?
So you can add 1, 2, or 3 to them. The more you add, the faster it'll colonize. You only need to add 1. So it's up to you if you want to add more than the 1. As you saw, I added 1 into the bag that we were doing here, part of the workshop. That's because I've been doing a whole bunch of methods, so I can. But realistically, it's up to you. If you have access to more substrate, then I would definitely say, why not? You can put the other 2 into the fridge. All right, get the substrate ready. Get another bag. You have a second bag, right? So you can at least do 2 bags. If you want to do 3, then you would need to go and get another bag as well. So there is also an alternative that you can use a shoebox container. So you don't necessarily need to use a bag. The bag is significantly more needed for anything that grows sideways, like lion's mane. But if you're doing like oyster mushrooms, you could theoretically just fill the inside of a container and have them grow from that. So it's probably not going to be it's not as easy to maintain humidity and things like that, right? This bag is like an all-encompassing environment, right? But if you put it inside of a plastic container, it doesn't have the filters, it doesn't have all that. So basically you need to like open it up and fan it and stuff like that, right? Which obviously increases the chance of contamination during that time. So you're going to be playing around. That's why we're not doing it for this workshop. But theoretically, you could do that if you didn't want to go get a 3rd bag. Or you can use, 1.5 jars for your first bag, and then use 1.5 jars of the substrate for your second bag. You just need to get the materials for the second bag. But you can also be record fast by using all 3 spawn in one jar, in one bag. So that's also an
Are
option.
you going to describe the rest of the process so we have an idea like how so the mushrooms grow in that one bag and that's their last environment, or how?
So this is their final environment. So so this also answers Audrey's question. So you guys basically have the same question. So there will be another session, right? That's Audrey's question, is whether there's going to be another session. Basically what's going to happen is that this brick is going to turn into a full colonized mycelium block, right? And when it's time, we're just going to, just like I believe it was Anne or Audrey had mentioned, basically we don't really need the air in there anymore. So we're going to be folding this down, right? Making it nice and compact. So it's just a big rectangle, and we're going to be cutting it open. And then we're going to be misting it. So we want to have that humidity in there. So we're actually going to be misting it probably a couple of times a day. Depends on what your environment is. If you have a lot of humidity around or not, if you want to put it in a container or not. At that point, because it's fully colonized, you don't really have any concerns for contamination. So that's the fantastic thing. So you're no longer on a contamination race. Now you're just on a provide that perfect environment for beautiful mushrooms to grow, and that's it. So you're going to be slicing it open. You kind of give it that rainforest kind of treatment with a little bit of humidity. You have your humidity tent in your kit. So basically that tent is going to sit over top of the bag in order to protect the humidity that's in there a little bit more. So that's why you only need to mist it like twice a day-ish, simply because it's going to keep in a lot of that humidity. But then that's it. Basically, it's going to start fruiting, and it's when it starts, it goes fast. So you're going to see the first day. It's going to look like maybe like the last time I did one from an actual cellar. I think I was misting it for 2 weeks or something like that. And usually they only take about a week for the mushrooms to start coming up. So after 2 weeks, I was like, I don't know what's going on here. And basically one morning I figured, okay, I'll just throw this in the garbage. I'm done with it. And then I looked at it and it had, basically 1 millimeter pins that were starting to form. I went, oh, just in time. Okay. And then I think 3 days later, I had a full cluster of mushrooms. Once it starts, it goes really fast. I usually actually put up, my camera on and do a time lapse of it, because I can do without my camera for 12 hours or something and get, the mushrooms growing a little bit during that time. So, but yeah, it's basically manages itself after that. You just need to add a little bit of humidity to it, and otherwise it does its own thing. So, but we will have another session before that. We're going to go into what it, if it actually looks good, using the humidity tent, misting, and then also kind of the harvesting component to it, because we're going to touch upon it. We're not going to go too deep into it, but we're going to start touching upon it, because when your mushrooms are ready to be picked, you need to pick them. You really don't want to wait, because they're just going to start going bad on you, right? So yeah, that's it. I hope I answered your question. And Audrey, I hope I answered your question.
Yes. So did you say that if we put all 3 jars in one bag, they'll all come like fast, and we'll maybe have more than we can deal with or whatever? But if we put them in more bags, they'll be paced better?
So it's a good question. So you will get the same amount of mushrooms from your block, regardless of how much spawn you put in.
Okay.
Right. Basically, it's the fact that you have 5 pounds of substrate. That's what's going to tell you, if you had a 10-pound bag or a 2-pound bag, that would differ on how much actual, mushrooms you get at the end of the day. regardless of whether you're putting in 3 jars or 1 jar of the mycelium, you still only have a 5-pound bag, right? It's going to be, you can add 3 pounds of spawn, you're gonna have an 8-pound bag in that case. But it's basically just still feeding off of the 5 pounds that you just provided. Whereas if you put 1 pound, you have a 6-pound bag, but it's still only eating the 5 pounds of substrate that's in there. So you're going to get the same amount of mushrooms regardless if you put 1 jar or 3 jars. But kind of like when we were talking about, if it's grain spawn, you'd break up individual grains. It creates more surface area for the mycelium to grow and expand. So if you have 3 jars of mycelium in there, that's a lot of mycelium, right? So that mycelium is going to start colonizing, and it's not just 1 pound that's colonizing 5, but it's 3 pounds that are colonizing 5, right? So there's a lot more surface area, and so it's going to expand and colonize a lot faster. So kind of to your question, it's a bit of a waste to add all 3 unless you really want it, soon. Now you're growing. Which ones are you growing?
I've got lion's mane and Sue has the black oyster.
Yeah.
Black king oyster, right? So the black king oyster, for example, takes a little bit longer to grow than the lion's mane, usually. So maybe if you want them at the same time, then you might want to add like 2 jars of the the black pearl oyster, and just 1 jar of the lion's mane, and they'll probably come out at around the same time. If you want them to be spread out, which you're probably going to get quite a bit of mushrooms out of this, so you might want it to be spread out. So in that case, adding just the equivalent, 1 jar, 1 jar, or 2 jars, 2 jars, or what have you, you're probably going to get them spaced out anyways, simply because one is hungrier than the other. But yes, you could theoretically space them out that way. If you were doing a second bag, of course, you can always do, 1 jar in there now, or 1.5. The rest goes in the fridge, and in a week or 2 weeks, you start your second bag. And obviously, you're going to have a 2-week gap between the 2 growths, right? So that's another option if you want to kind of spread it out a little bit more over time.
So we put the jar in the fridge?
Yeah,
Jar.
if it's colonized, if the spawn is ready to go, and you're not using it right away, put it in the fridge. In fact, the ideal temperature is basically like, almost freezing, just above freezing. Basically, you're trying to get it to just stop and hibernate, because it's looking for food, right? So if it's out at room temperature, then it's going to move faster. It's going to metabolize faster. And so if you don't have any food left for it, then it's going to start starving faster, right? So put it in the fridge if it's ready to go. And then you have basically a month to use it. But you're going to lose strength as time goes on, right? So if you do use it, if you use 1 jar now, and your next bag you're only doing it in like 3 weeks from now, then I would definitely use both jars in 3 weeks.
Question for you, Rob, it's Anne.
And
When you put the spare jars in the fridge, should you replace the lid, like remove the holes that are in the lid? Wouldn't that invite some contamination in there?
no, you don't have to worry about it. So first off, the spawn has already done its thing. The mycelium has already done its thing. So it's basically won the race, right? Once you're putting it in there. So there shouldn't be any contamination, but also it should also be basically consuming food still as it's going. So it's releasing carbon dioxide. So if you trap it in there, you're going to kill it. So keep the holes, keep the same lid.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Anything else? No? All right, sounds good. Well, that's basically it then. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, I know some of you are doing this after the fact, so if you have any questions, feel free to message me in the virtual classroom, and yeah, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you, Sylvia. All right. Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure, always. We go to stage 2. By the way, I will mention that there's, because some people had to restart due to contamination or what have you, some people just started the workshop a little late. We're going to be doing a second session of stage 2 in like 3 weeks, probably. So if, I mean, I assume that, you know, you guys are ready to go. You've heard all of this already, so you don't really need a second session, but, you know, kind of to Margot's question there of, you know, doing some now and doing some later. If you wanted to do some now based on this, then do some again later based on a second live session, then there will be a second live session, but maybe that's not needed. I'm not sure. Anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. I'm going to be sending out a little reminder to fill out the survey. If nothing has changed, then feel free to ignore it. But of course, if you know you have any input, then that'd be great. Quick question: is my video quality better this time than last time? No. Okay. I got different internet. It was faster internet, so I was just curious. All right. Perfect. I'll leave it there then.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great end to your weekend.